and that did not happen. So I, for those of us who knew him, it's kind of a legacy that we're carrying on our shoulders. But the Florida Defenders of the Environment and several individuals, my clients, in a federal litigation against the U.S. Forest Service to remove Rodman Dam, which is currently pending in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta. And I have had the pleasure of knowing and working with Jim over the years. He has served as an excellent and very capable expert witness on my Rainbow Springs case from a couple of years back. And I think you guys are going to learn a lot. I every time I listen to someone who has a science-based background, I really scratch my head wondering why I went into law, because their work sounds just so much more interesting and fun. But anyway, it's just great to see everyone, and I'll pass the baton along to you, Jim.
Okay, excuse me, I made a mistake. I overlooked Pat Jensen. So Jim, before you take the stage, Pat, would you like to introduce yourself?
I sure would. My name is Pat Jensen. I am the precinct chairwoman for Precinct 106 on the Democratic Executive Committee. That's how I heard about this. And because my background is, I was an working for the DEP, I was a hazardous waste specialist, and I've spent many years in the environmental field and teaching, and I'm originally a masshole from Boston, so I'm obnoxious. And so I love everything about the environment, and I hate all of the trash and the dirt around here and people making a mess and just ignoring the environment. So when I saw environmental, I said, I have to be here.
Well, thank you. And the last thing I want to do is incur the wrath of Diana Bell, who I overlooked. So Diane, nature photographer extraordinaire, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Sorry I'm late. Like the other night, I just totally forgot and I went, oh shit. Okay. Anyway, I'm Diane A. Bell. I'm a retired landscape architect, park and community planner. I worked at Fire Island National Seashore for 23 years, retired from there, moved to St. Augustine. So my profession was landscape architecture, licensed, registered, and all of that in New York. But photography has always been my passion, and nature and wildlife photography has become my focus, and that's what I do now. And of course, working for the Park Service and being a landscape architect and having some of those kind of building technical expertise and learning about birds and whatnot, the environment is critically important, and it is our future. It's our children's future. So I'm passionate about it.
Okay. Thank you, Diane. And did I miss anybody else here? Okay, Jim, could you, rather than me reading off a nice resume you sent me, could you just please describe your background, and then you have the floor.
Sure, absolutely. So good evening, everyone. My name is Jim Gross. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you tonight. It's always an honor to do so. I'm a geologist. I've been working in water resources for the past 44 years. Some of it in the early days was in geothermal energy exploration for hot water and steam. I wear a couple of hats now. I'm an adjunct professor at Santa Fe College, where I teach a course called Earth and Space Science. And I'm also the executive director of Florida Defenders of the Environment. So I've got kind of a three-part talk tonight, and I'm going to just do a brief introduction, historical background about the main topic, which is the legacy of the Cross Florida Barge Canal, particularly as it intersects with the Ocklawaha River. And then I'm going to walk through kind of in a zooming in from outer space down aerial images on the landscape, images of where this project actually was intended to be built and partially did get built. And then the third part of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about after the project was canceled and deauthorized, what were the alternatives that were looked at after this project was partially built, and what was the final alternative that was selected for the Ocklawaha River. So let me see if I can get into share screen mode with the presentation showing. All right, let me go full screen. And I've made my mouse cursor really big so everybody can see what I'm pointing at, hopefully. So the Cross Florida Barge Canal project, it actually has roots that go all the way back to Spanish colonial era, when Europeans were looking for a way to not have to navigate around the southern tip of the Florida Peninsula. And those were dangerous waters back then. They're kind of dangerous even today. So it goes way, way back. But it didn't start coming into fruition until the Depression, when there was some, in the 30s, when there was some money set aside to get started. But there was only 1 year of work that was done during the Depression. And then because there wasn't any more money left, it just stopped. But in the early 60s, the project got off the ground, particularly under Lyndon Johnson. And that's when opposition to this, because of its adverse environmental impacts, this has been floating around for a while, this idea. And the people who were paying close attention recognize this was going to be an extraordinarily devastating project for Florida in terms of the environment and its water resources. So their opposition began to form very early. There were actually some organizations that preceded the organization I work for, Florida Defenders of the Environment, but ultimately Florida Defenders of the Environment was formed in 1969 for the precise reason to try to oppose and stop the construction of this project. FDE filed a lawsuit in 1969, and that was a time of great social, political unrest, not terribly dissimilar to today. And eventually, in 1971, the judge in this federal court in Washington, D.C., sided with FDE's lawsuit and said, you know, you're right. This project is going to have some significant environmental impacts that have not been considered. And he ordered an injunction to stop the construction of the project. When it was initially authorized, it was prior to the federal legislation that we know today as NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, that requires any federal dollars going on a project to look at environmental impacts. And so when the Corps of Engineers, who was in charge of this project, finally got around to looking at this project, what they found out was that it didn't make any sense whatsoever. It was upside down on its cost-benefit ratio once you figured in the impacts, economic and ecological impacts altogether. Okay. All right. So now we're going to kind of walk through a few slides, and like I say, we're going to start kind of looking at these images from Google Earth that I put together. And here we're looking at the Florida Peninsula. And so basically what we were talking about is, instead of having to go from, the Mississippi River all the way around down here and around, can you see my cursor?
Mhm.
Okay. And back up again. These are especially hazardous waters down in here in these coral reefs. There had long been attempts to find a way to get across the Florida Peninsula. And a lot of different routes were looked at. Some that I just found about recently were in far, far north, using the Swanee River as part of the possible transit. So here we're looking at 1,000 miles above the Earth's surface. We're going to move to zoom down to 115 miles above Earth's surface. And I'm going to put a couple of red ovals up that overlay portions of the Cross Florida Barge Canal. And you can see the green line here, this is the actual today Cross Florida Greenway that was set aside originally for the Cross Florida Barge Canal project. It comes in from the west side, and all this area that's sort of lighter colored, these are uplands. And so this is the area that had to have locks and gates to step those. Originally it was going to be a ship canal, and then it was later changed to be a barge canal, shallower draft. And so they were going to step across these locks up across this upland, and then get into the valley of the Ocklawaha River and move towards the St. Johns River. All right, zooming down now to 77 miles above Earth's surface, get a little bit clearer view of the barge canal lands that were designated for the project. And here's the larger oval that goes from the northeast towards the southwest, encompasses much of where the project facilities were intended to be built. All right, now we're at 28 miles above Earth's surface. And I had some things on here. This is the impoundment. Here's the dam. This is the original course of the Ocklawaha River right through here. It's hard to tell, but these more grayish green areas here are wetlands along the course of the natural channel of the Ocklawaha River. So it comes up from the south, makes a big turn to the east. It's dammed off here. And this is the barge canal right here that was put in to go from the St. Johns River all the way towards to the Ocklawaha River through the lock that we'll see here in just a second. And we got some of the facilities are actually named here. The impoundment is behind the dam, and here's the canal, and the lock is right in this particular area right in here. We'll zoom in on that a little bit more here in a second. The dam and the natural course of the river flows down this direction here and joins the St. Johns River right here at the confluence of the two rivers. Now just 4.7 miles above the surface of the landscape in Florida, you get a better idea of what the dam looks like. And this is actually the the natural channel of the river here. But that's not terribly used much, because most of the water that comes out of the dam goes down what's called the tail race here, and then flows down the river from there. Now just about a mile, excuse me, above the Earth's surface, 1.1 miles. Looking at the dam, you can see the white water that's flowing down from the dam. The elevations in the reservoir typically around 18, 19 feet above sea level, and then below the dam they're typically in the range of 3 to 5 feet above sea level, and then flows down towards the St. Johns River. Here's a view of the actual lock that the barges would have to go through. So we're looking at where you get stepped up from St. Johns River water level up on the right here in the northeast part of this map, and then they go through these gates, and then once they're in there, this gate closes, and they bring the water level up in that lock, and then afterwards this gate opens, and then they can get into the impoundment behind the dam. And this is the actual headquarters for the Greenway and the operation of this facility. Here is a view looking downstream, from the downstream side of the dam, looking upstream at the gates. So I took this picture in 2010 when I still worked for the Water Management District, the St. Johns River Water Management District. And So it's not in a very large structure, but the gates are used to go up and down to control the water that flows out of the reservoir. And people do like to fish on the downstream side of the river. In fact, it's the only good place for fishing from the shore, because once you get on the other side of the dam, there isn't really any good shore fishing up in that part. You really need a boat, and most people spend a fair amount of money for the kinds of boats that there are needed to get to where the good fishing is. And here's a photo from a couple years later, 2012, still working for the Water Management District out of Palatka. And this is from the upstream side of the dam looking downstream. And these are, this grading is intended to keep debris from getting into the gates. So that's basically to keep out floating vegetation, logs, and people who are in their boats from getting caught up in the gates. Okay, now we're going to move on and look at the 4 alternatives to restore, or not so much restore, the Ocklawaha River. This is kind of an overview, so we're not going to get down too much into the details. But once again, once we got to the point where the project was deauthorized, the questions arose as to what are we going to do now? Are we going to leave it the way it is? Are we going to take everything out, or maybe something in between? So in 1995, pardon me, in 1991, the project was deauthorized. It was deauthorized both by the federal government and also by the state of Florida. And the state of Florida created a committee called the Canal Lands Advisory Committee, or CLAC, to look at the situation and make some recommendations about the disposition of the barge canal lands and infrastructure. In 1992, this committee issued its final report, but it failed to make a recommendation. The reason it failed to make a recommendation is that this was so politically polarized by that time that the committee felt like it didn't want to make a recommendation. It just got tremendously polarized, and there was a lot of information and misinformation flying back and forth. And this committee basically backed away from its charter to make a recommendation. So in 1993, the Florida legislature stepped in. They allocated $900,000 to examine 4 possible alternatives. And these alternatives basically came from the legislature. Let's take a look at see what they were. The first one was, don't do anything. Keep everything the way it is. That was called total retention. Don't change anything. The second alternative was called partial retention, which is to say, well, let's keep the dam intact, but we'll maintain a lower water level behind the dam. And so about 4 feet lower. Well, 4 feet lower isn't even as low as the reservoir is drawn down every so often to address problems with invasive aquatic vegetation in the reservoir. So that wasn't really much of anything at all. Didn't get much support. And then there was something called partial restoration, which really afforded the most bang for the buck. It was restore a free-flowing river with minimum alterations needed to achieve that free-flowing river. So you get all the ecological benefits without having to take out everything that was put in. And then the last choice was take it all out, complete restoration, remove everything that had been constructed. That was going to be a lot more expensive, but didn't really actually provide any more ecological benefits, and turns out may actually have produced fewer economic opportunities, because some of that infrastructure that was put in looks like it's going to have some potential to be capitalized for recreational facilities after we have a free-flowing Ocklawaha River again. So partial restoration. The third one is what was selected. Now, let's look at the work products from for these. So there was an executive summary of all the scientific analyses. And by the way, these were done by, most of this was done by the Water Management District, St. John's River Water Management District. And then volumes 2 through 20 are individual reports in tedious detail. I can't actually recommend anybody trying to read this stuff. It's interesting to scientists and engineers only, but there's a lot of detail there and thousands of pages of text. And then the state decided that it would do its own economic analysis. And I have to tell you, I have yet to secure that document. I've never seen it anywhere. But supposedly the state of Florida, FDEP, did an economic analysis of the alternatives. Conclusion of all that work, $900,000 worth of work, got done pretty quickly. And this comes out of a book called Ditch of Dreams. And it's by Stephen Knoll and David Tegeter, published originally in 2009. And this is their actual words. Hidden in volumes of dense prose was a simple statement. Efforts should be directed instead at restoration of the Ocklawaha River. But I challenge people to find that in those thousands of pages. Once again, this was very political, and it was difficult to get people to come right out and say, this is what we should do. Okay, I'm going to walk you through partial restoration, what the components are. First with a little bit of text, and then we'll look at some different things. So first off, a phased drawdown of the reservoir to be accomplished over 3 years, right? 3 years. And there would be some work that was going on during that period of time, particularly revegetation to prevent erosion. And the second component was limited construction of channel stabilization and erosion control structures in the Ocklawaha River. It doesn't sound like much, but I'll show you some diagrams and some figures of that. Limited planting of native trees to provide for erosion control as needed. Partial leveling of the exposed barge canal side cast spoil berms. Okay, what does that mean? Well, when they dug out the canal, they had to put the material, the earth material somewhere, and they put it basically right by the side of the canal that was excavated. And those are called the side cast spoil berms. Number 5, they were to restore the historic Ocklawaha River channel by filling the barge canal where it intersects the river channel. I'll show you that here in a second. That doesn't mean much to you. And we'll get a few more here. Restoration of the historic Deep Creek channel flow. This is on the north side of the Ocklawaha River. It's a tributary, but it was basically cut off by the construction of the project. So they're going to restore that Deep Creek channel flow back to the Ocklawaha River. Number 7 is restoration of the historic Camp Branch floodplain. This is another tributary on the north side coming into the Ocklawaha River that needed to also be restored. This one actually intersects with the barge canal itself. closure and securing of the Buckman Lock, and then removal of 2,000 feet of the Rodman Dam. Now the dam is much more than 2,000 feet. It's closer to 5,000, but it didn't all need to be taken out. So again, this was to be as cost effective as possible, recognizing that there would still be a bridge across the river for people to get back and forth across the river.
Excuse me, Jim.
Yeah.
Hi, this is John. I just want to, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm hearing some voice in the background and it's interruptive. So could I ask everybody to please mute themselves to make sure they're muted?
Yeah, I hear that too.
Yeah, it's coming across.
John, you may have to do a master mute.
Can you not mute?
Then the speaker can unmute himself if he's a co-host.
Okay. Can you hear me still?
Yeah. That's
Okay,
good, Jim. Thank
okay.
you.
Okay, so to removal of 2,000 feet of the dam itself, and then the last one, partial filling and restoration of what's called the spillway tail race back just below the dam, because that would be stagnant water that would have a tendency to grow a lot of algae in it. That's not a good thing. This is a little hard to see, but it's basically it's showing some of the original engineering drawings that were put together by an engineering firm, Post Buckley, Shoe and Jernigan, that outlined where the work would be done. So we're looking at these 10 are the same things that I already showed you. They basically span from this area here on the Ocklawaha River, flowing north, and then all the way down to the dam, and then at the Buckman Lock itself. These are all the things where they were going to do partial restoration. So let's take some closer look at these. Now, I'm not identifying all of them, but I'm looking at the 1 through 3 are basically mostly a little bit of revegetation. So this is in the main part of the reservoir, as well as on the canal, as well in the lock area. So number 4 is where they needed to do partial leveling of the side cast spoil. If we were to actually know where the channel is, it's hard to see here because it's very dark water, but it basically flows down through the middle of this black area here, which is the impoundment, goes right through this ellipse here, 5, goes through 6, and then it turns down and comes down here to where the natural channel can be seen below the dam. So 5 is filling in the canal at the intersect with the natural channel. Right here, here's where the canal goes across here. And then 6 is restoring the Deep Creek channel. So this is Deep Creek coming in here, and it needed to be restored so it intersected with the Ocklawaha River. And then 7 is restoring the Camp Branch channel and floodplain. Now the water does get down through here, but under a restoration alternative, there's some work that needs to be done here so that it flows a little bit more naturally. So that was going to have to be filled in that area. And then 8 is close the Buckman Canal, or Buckman Lock, and then 9 is remove 2,000 feet of the dam itself, right above the natural channel of the Ocklawaha River. And then 10, fill in this tail race here, because this is going to be stagnant water once the river starts flowing through its natural river course. And that would have a tendency to grow algae, possibly blue-green algae and whatnot. And so that the plan was to at least partially refill that. On the very far upstream side of this, very just north of the Silver River, this is the Eureka Lock and Dam, and under the partial restoration scenario, this facility did not need to be tinkered with at all, and it's proposed to just stay the way it is. So just like there was a lock built closer to the St. Johns River, this lock was built too. It's right here. This is the actual lock. But it was closed as soon as this project was deauthorized and has never been used for anything, and will just stay there under the partial restoration. And there may be some opportunities for further recreational facilities to be put in this area. All right, let's look at the key benefits from restoration. So connectivity is a huge issue with river systems. People who don't pay close attention to how rivers work don't necessarily understand this and don't necessarily appreciate it. But fish species must move up and down the river. There are some species of fish that have been entirely lost from the basin because they needed to get upstream for breeding. And then I'm talking about striped bass, which have basically disappeared from the Ocklawaha. They bred in the Ocklawaha, they spawned, and then they would live out much of their lifespan out in the ocean. So anadromous fish. And there's others besides striped bass. Improved water quality by reduced use of toxic herbicides. Well, imagine you take away a river that's shaded and is dominated by spring flow, cool flowing river coming out of Silver Spring, Silver River, and then the Ocklawaha itself is basically a chain of springs all the way down to the dam. And so this was a spring fed, it was very cool. And so when we converted it to being a big, large, open, almost stagnant pond, it was warmer and stagnant, and boy, did the aquatic vegetation get out of control. So to control it, we use toxic herbicides, and those are not so good. Restoration of functioning wetlands. A lot of people don't understand that wetlands only are functional on a river system when they are adjacent to a channel. When we have a big storm and there's a big slug of water coming down the Ocklawaha River, it doesn't really change much the elevation of the water behind the dam because it's such a large storage area and because we can control its outflow. So we don't have the necessary rising of water up to the edge of the channel, and then it spills out into the floodplain, bringing nutrients out into the floodplain. That kind of activity is essential for floodplains. We've lost it now for 50 years, and we'll get that back with, excuse me, a free-flowing Ocklawaha River. So we need to get our wetlands back. Oh, by the way, our wetlands below the dam have also been damaged heavily because, again, the water levels are regulated as they go through the dam, and so we don't have those big rises of water level that spill out into the floodplain below the dam either. So there's something on the order of 15,000 acres of riparian wetlands that we can get back, and the habitat that provides. Now, this thing about manatees, a lot of people don't think about it too much. I suspect with this audience, you already know this very well, that we have been harboring manatees at artificial warm water discharges during those wickedly cold winter snaps when temperatures in the water drop below the survival temperatures for manatees, right? Once the temperatures get too cold, they can't drop too far, they start dying. And prehistorically and historically, they found refuge at springs. And once we dammed up the Ocklawaha River, they were shut out of all of those springs along the Ocklawaha, all the way to Silver Springs. And they started going to these cooling, these power plants that use what's called one-street cooling. They pump water out of the river, it goes into the power plant, gets warm, and they discharge it back to the river. Well, all those plants are going away because they don't meet standards for Clean Water Act. When water comes out of a river and goes into a once-through cooling plant and it goes through the plant, it gets pretty darn hot. And all the entrained organisms in that water are totally cooked and they come out dead. And so those kinds of power plants are disappearing, and they're going to be replaced with a different type of power plant, of cooling tower. They're going to be using cooling towers instead of once-through cooling. So at any rate, so what we need to do is we need to be giving those manatees back places to go during those really cold winter snaps that we have basically every year. And then improved economic opportunities in the region. And this is really significant. It's been looked at several times. It was looked at a few years ago by some economists at the University of Florida. And lately, just recently, it was updated a couple more times. And it looks like there are tremendous opportunities to actually capitalize on some of the infrastructure that's there in and near the dam, to build on it and put in additional recreational facilities. And this was just recently looked at by some students in an upper division class at the University of Florida under Professor Tom Hochter. And I had the opportunity to lecture to his class last semester. And they came up on their special projects with just an amazing array of potential economic opportunities to capitalize on recreation in and around the dam area. So let's see, I think that's my last bullet there. Yes, and that's basically all I've got for prepared slides, and be happy to take questions if people are so interested. I will unshare my screen. There we go. John, are you going to unmute yourself and moderate?
Thank you, Jim. Well, I guess now is the time for discussion. Jane, if you, I know you've been involved in litigation related to this issue. Would you like to make any comments specifically to this?
Sure. I mean, this has been a saga, as Jim has pointed out, for decades now. And it's really been very challenging to make any sort of headway at the state or federal level. Sorry, it's getting dark in here. But you know, we continue to work on this, and I would encourage people to continue to put the pressure on the legislatures to make sure that this becomes a priority. Quite frankly, it's just been lagging for the longest time, and primarily because of bass fishermen interests. But it's, you know, it's more than that. It's kind of become like the cultural identity, primarily for Putnam County and Palaca in particular. You talk about removing Rodman Dam, and as Kathleen pointed out earlier, people get really, really fired up over this issue. And yes, there is bass fishing there, but most of the bass fishermen fish along the St. Johns River at this point. And if any of you have ever had an opportunity to kayak or canoe the Rodman Reservoir, what Jim was referring to as the impoundment, during one of the water management district's periodic drawdowns, it is quite literally one of the eeriest landscapes I have ever witnessed in the natural environment in my life. It's all these very old cypress trees that are kind of cut off at the 20-foot level. And it's just a graveyard of sorts. It's spooky, but still worth visiting. And, you know, I have great hope that we can get to the point of restoration and a free flowing Ocklawaha River that doesn't involve, you know, dynamite.
And if I may add to that, Jane,
Yeah.
you know, this at one time wasn't really very political on the scale that it became later on. Every single governor from Reuben Askew in 1971 all the way through Charlie Crist, 7 governors in a row, 4 Democrats, 3 Republicans, all came out in favor of restoring a free-flowing Ocklawaha River. And for obvious reasons, it made ecological sense, it made economic sense. But we have become more polarized since then, and people latch on to issues sometimes just for the polarity of being on their side. So we've got to fight that. Communications are really important.
Yeah, and I would add one of the real benefits here would be the freshwater flow into the St. Johns River to the tune of 300 million gallons per day, which we really do need. Towards the mouth of the St. Johns, we're seeing increased salinity impacts that are negatively impacting the wetlands up in that area, which is only going to be exacerbated by the deep dredging of Jacksport that will allow for more saltwater intrusion. So getting a free-flowing Ocklawaha River is critically important. But I saw a couple people had their hands up. Diane, hi. Oh,
Yeah, good. Okay, you can hear me now, right?
yes.
Okay, my question is, having not read this thousands of pages report and likely never will, it's been my experience in environmental restoration that sometimes, you think the most is the best thing to do, but sometimes the removal of things that have been constructed is sometimes more detrimental to the environment that we have today than just leaving it in place. So when I think in terms of the partial restoration, does that allow for the free flow without damaging just by virtue of removal, as you said, dynamite? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Yes.
and that was sarcasm, by the way.
No.
But I'll let Jim handle that.
Yes, the partial restoration alternative basically reestablishes the river in its original channel right through the area where the dam is. 2,000 feet of that dam would go away. There would be a bridge that allowed people to cross the river there, and because it's the Florida Trail, hikers as well. That bridge is the Florida Trail, and so we want to preserve that feature as well. It's an amenity. So yeah, and so all the environmental benefits are there from partial restoration, and it's just the most cost-effective approach.
Yeah, because when people think in terms of full restoration, just restore the whole thing the way it was, sometimes that's not the best thing. It's just not, for so many reasons.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'd also like to point out that this past January marked the 50th anniversary of Rodman Dam. So we're talking about a really aging piece of infrastructure at this point, which is in bad need of repair to the tune of potentially $6 million. And this is not a dam that provides any sort of energy source. It's not providing any net benefit other than impounding a large body of water. So paying taxpayer money to maintain something that isn't even providing, hydro energy is, a waste, quite frankly. And there are so many recreational opportunities that I think could be a real valuable infusion to a fairly impoverished county, Putnam County, that has a lot of potential.
That's right, Jane. We build dams for 4 reasons all across the world, but this particular dam doesn't function for any of those 4 reasons.
Right.
Kathleen, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you. I see Mary also has her hand up. My
As
question
do
is,
I.
can we use the carrot and stick approach? I mean, I know those guys, the biggest thing was taking their big boats out on the water and fishing for the big fish that have been stocked there, that aren't natural, are not necessarily native to the area. But they do this weekend after weekend after weekend. They have made it their culture, and now for 2 or 3 generations. Is there a carrot here we can use?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd say that. Yeah,
the
you want to answer
recreational
that, Jane?
Yeah, I mean, I think the recreational component is a multi-million dollar industry that is completely untapped in Putnam County. If any of you have taken the time to explore the William Bartram Trail, you've got the Florida Trail going through there. You've got, paddling trips, biking trips, hiking paths. This could just really add to the recreational component that Putnam County could offer. There's a lot of benefit, and that's the primary carrot that we're offering. We've been using the carrot and stick approach, Kathleen, for a couple of years now, with the stick being the federal litigation. Believe me, we have tried multiple different methods here. It's a very challenging, complex issue.
People don't travel from far away to come to fish in Rodham. It's basically a place where locals, it's convenient for them to fish. And
wasn't windy when we were processing. It was so. Oh my goodness.
Jen, you may need to mute.
What are you listening to?
Yes, could everybody please mute?
Yeah, Stephen's iPhone, we're getting a lot of noise from your iPhone.
I was muted.
Thank you.
Okay.
so I was
I
gonna-
just
I was
want to,
gonna-
if I could, for just a second, not well-versed on this particular issue. I've been aware of it for many years, but I'm not well-versed. But I am pretty well-versed on the bass fishing culture and where the favorite fishing spots are or where they are. So I just want to, raise the point that hunters and fishermen are really also, I'm not advocating, okay, I just want to make, I don't think this is a them kind of thing. That's what I'm trying to say. They appreciate nature in ways, I get out once every month or so out in the woods. If I'm really doing well, living in an urban environment, they make it a priority in their lives to be out in nature, whether they're fishing or hunting or whatever. And I have a lot of respect for those folks for making that a priority. I just would hate to cast this as an us versus them thing. That dams are problematic everywhere, whether it's internationally or in this country. And there are lots of reasons to remove them and restore free flowing waters and restore these wetland ecosystems. But I think there has to be a way to include the bass fishermen in this conversation as something that is, you're right, Jane, it is a cultural identity. And I just, we can't, I hate having an us versus them. I think we have to find a way to include them in the solution to the problem. If that dam is failing, which it will, then, what is their alternative? How do they maintain their favorite bass fishing grounds or move to better ones? So I just wanted to say that little bit.
Well, I think this is exactly where we are with the coalition of partners that have been working together now for quite some time, is that this doesn't have to be a polarized discussion. This is a win-win opportunity for people who like to sport fish and people who like to do other things on rivers. And so we've been reaching out to them like crazy. We've got quite a few now who've come over and have actually come around to seeing the world that restoration of the rivers will be better. And so those are the folks that we're trying to use as spokespeople for this issue, so to try to broaden the base of sport fishing to support restoration of the river. So again, it doesn't have to be a win-lose. It can be a win-win situation.
Yeah,
And it will be. It will be.
Seems to me, yeah, we don't want to make it another part of the cultural wars, but it seems like maybe it is becoming that, or has become that. Chris McDermott, I know you had your hand up.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Jane. But in one talk, I think you only get so much of the picture. So this is my third time with you, Jim Gross. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but the Ocklawaha River is a travesty. I've kayaked it twice with Sierra Club. It's like going out in a bathtub. The water is so brown and tan from the dead trees and leaves. It's eerie. It flows north, does it not, into the St. John's, basically.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
And then it turns
Yeah.
east
So if you
at the reservoir.
yeah. So it starts out and it goes through Putnam and ends up in St. Johns County. And the problem is they built the dam right over 6 natural springs. Those 6 natural springs flow into the reservoir where it captures the water and it's still and becomes useless. So there's nothing natural about bass fishing in the Rodman Reservoir. Second, you know, as you tried to explain, Jim, there could be great fishing in the St. John's, and some of the best game fish are blocked and stunted in their growth and survival because the Ocklawaha, which God and whoever else created the earth made, a tributary of the St. John's, is completely cut off. It's one of, I think, 3 great rivers that feed the St. John's, or almost great. And now it's nothing at all but a trickle. So, the amount of environmental damage and fish damage and nuttiness that this cross Florida barge canal, it reminds me of the Frankenstein story. You all know the Frankenstein story. Dr. Frankenstein created an artificial creature, and when it came alive, it tried to kill him. So he rejected it. And the community outside, though, then came in and wanted to kill it. The Rodman Dam story is you created a Frankenstein, and the community outside said, "It's so cute, I can't live without it. Don't kill it, let it live." So we have our own little lovable Frankenstein on the border, and St. John's County, St. John's River, St. John's Fishing and Recreation, along with Palatka, would be so much more world class, so much more varied and sustainable if we got rid of the damn dam. And let's not forget that not only would the 6 springs be then putting that fresh water out, that helps the other animals that depend on seawater for their production. And we avoid $6 million, I think, is the latest estimate of repairing and keeping the dam in place and not letting it gradually just fall apart. So I think it's a very compelling story. It's really, it's not a case of 51 on one hand and 49 on the other. If you know the story, you know that it's an abomination. And if we could all understand all the negative side effects and all the positive benefits of going back to something like we had naturally, then I think seeing is believing. It would be wonderful. Thank you.
Chris, if I can ask,
Very well said.
everybody here knows more about this than I do. Would there be any unintended consequences, not politically or anything, just naturally, for getting rid of the dam? And what would be the best way?
Let Jim answer that question. I'm not going to answer it, but go ahead.
No, just one other question, because I don't know. What would be the best way to get rid of it? Blow it up? I mean, I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question.
I'd be willing to donate some firecrackers at least.
Okay. But again,
Jim, over to you. It's a great question, John, but I don't feel qualified to answer, so I can't say.
Jim, the unintended consequences and how to get rid of the damn thing, if that's what we want to do.
John, do I interpret your question to mean unintended adverse consequences?
Right, yeah.
No, because this issue has been around so long, it's been so heavily studied, ecologically, hydrologically, environmentally, economic, all across the board. It's been studied up and down. And the thing is that this is not a rare situation. It's been estimated that there are on the order of 91,000 dams in just the United States alone. And we've been taking them down, the ones that are aged out now, for quite a while, for several decades. And the story of restoration is essentially universally successful in terms of bringing these rivers back. So unintended ecological adverse consequences, no. Rivers have a wonderful way of restoring their health all by themselves once we let them go free. So.
Okay, fair enough. Mary, you had a question, Mary Underfoot? Or a comment?
Yes, and I don't know how I became Mary all of a sudden, but I really am Mary, so
Yes.
that's a good thing.
Yeah, that could be changed. I did that so I wouldn't call you Gail again.
Oh, okay.
And Gail is
So-
Mary's daughter, by the way.
So if I understand correct, if I'm hearing what I'm hearing, do I understand correctly that essentially the main objection to this is the fishing that goes on at that dam? Is that the main objection to this restoration?
I would say yes, that's it. I haven't seen any other arguments that are plausible. Now, those who want to keep the dam in place because they like to sport fish there, and will advance alternative explanations why it's good to keep the dam in place. But if you look at each one of them one by one, they fall apart. They don't make sense. For example, you'll hear people say, "Oh, it would be a great source of water supply if we ever run out of groundwater."
Okay.
that argument sounds appealing to the person who hears it and isn't familiar with Florida's hydrology, but it's
Right.
exactly the opposite of what would happen. That's a
Right.
spring-fed river. If we run out of groundwater because we pumped it down so low, the river will be gone first.
Right. So okay, so Jim, if that is the case and it's restored, how in your slides you talked about recreational opportunities and economic boosts and all that good stuff. Would bass fishing be part of that with respect to what I believe it was Barbara who spoke about these people? They've been there a long time and they do respect the land. And is bass fishing going to be completely eliminated if it's restored? I'm just trying to understand that.
No.
Not at all. Not at all. Bass
No.
fishing is going to get better. It'll be easier to catch bass. You know, there are still a few people around who fished before the dam was put there. They used to be able to go out into the Ocklawaha River, and in less than an hour's worth of time, this is pre-dam, they could have a string of not just largemouth bass, but the stripers who have disappeared, the striped bass. And the striped bass are much bigger than the largemouth bass. And they could feed a party of 50 people with like 30 minutes of fishing.
Wow.
And so, you know,
Wow.
the fishing opportunities are only going to get better. And the fish will be healthy because we won't be poisoning them with herbicides. And there's another issue here that we don't often think about. And it's also a poisoning issue because the dam is impounding a lot of dead aquatic vegetation that settles to the bottom. Fallout of mercury from coal burning plants bioaccumulates in the impoundment in the organic material, and then it bioaccumulates up the food chain such that by the time you get to the top level predators, which you're talking now, it's largemouth bass and alligators, those critters have the highest concentrations of mercury in their bodies. And so, you know how many people eat the bass they catch there anymore? No one. Do you know what the health department says about eating largemouth bass out of the Ocklawaha River? They say that if you're a guy, an adult guy, you could probably eat one a month and that it wouldn't have a significant effect on your health. But if you are a woman of childbearing years or children, you should never, ever, ever eat largemouth bass caught in the Ocklawaha River because the mercury's too high.
Hmm.
And
And-
you know
and
who
Jim-
fishes there?
Alligator.
Subsistence fishermen fish there on the lower Ocklawaha, and they are poisoning their families now because, and this is a social justice issue.
Well, I had before I did. But
And I was just going to point out to Mary that I don't know if you're familiar with Palaka since you've recently come, I think you said from California, but
Mhm.
there is a huge bass fishing tournaments that happen every couple of weeks right there on the St. Johns River, not the Rodman Reservoir. It happens on the St. Johns River right there in downtown Palaka, because that's where the bass really are at this point. And Jim's point on the mercury poisoning from the coal plant, that's the Seminole electric plant right there in Palaka that definitely does. You guys have probably seen the big cooling towers in the distance from St. Augustine, but that's a coal-fired power plant. One of those is going to be converting to natural gas, but the other one is still online and dumping lots of mercury into the local waters. And unfortunately, subsistence fishermen do eat those fish all the time.
And their children.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, thank you. I'm learning so much. Wow, thank you. Mm.
Any other comments, questions?
Well, just real quickly, Florida is famous for bass fishing, like those bass, but the top 5 are not here. But Lake George over in Switzerland is a top bass spot. So if they really want to be inland lakes, freshwater fisher people, there are other places to go, but they just have to drive 25 to 30 miles. Or the top one is now in Kissimmee, so they have to drive 90 miles. But they're there. But I think the point should be understood that the St. John's, it's restoration of the Ocklawaha. It's also restoration of the St. John's, one of the mightiest rivers in the most important river in Florida, besides the other two. But it's most important to us because it's the one that's closest to us. So the benefit all along to the wildlife, the manatees, the people that wouldn't be eating lead-filled fish, it's tremendous. So, I mean, it's a great story. I think it needs to be told. And the other stories are mostly nonsense and they need to be untold. So, I mean, really. So thank you, Jim, and thanks all of you for paying attention. I hope the caucus can really be part of working together masterfully to overcome the polarization and the negativity and understand how this could be a win-win and how we ought to work together on it.
There are 2 other hands up, Kathleen and
Thank you.
Diane. Kathleen?
Thank you. My hand was not removed from my previous comments. I
Oh,
will lower it.
all right,
There.
Diane,
Thanks.
Okay,
Diane, is yours new hand?
Nope.
My hand is a hand. My hand is a hand, and I just was wondering, has anybody else besides me been able to kayak in Cannon Springs during the drawdown? Okay, Jim, I suspected you might. Anybody else? Okay, we got another 3 years. It's really, put it on your calendar. It's the scene behind me is the I guess it's the tributary from the that led into Cannon Springs. I had the foresight or whatever, the presence of mind to take a picture of it while we were paddling back from the experience. And you may see some of the roots of the trees there or the base of the trees that look darker. And that's because that's where the river normally is. So I was there last February, and what surprised me, because I'd seen the movie and the paintings that I forget the lady that did them, but
Talbert.
I'm sorry?
Margaret Talbert.
Margaret Talbert. And I said to myself, I want to go there. You know, it was a couple of years I had to wait, and I was so glad I did. It's the most magical experience. And, you know, you think of springs, but this is it's a tiny little jewel in the middle of a forested area. It's just, the colors are just, it's like an opal. They're just so colorful for being so small and so fragile. And my husband and I kayaked in with our wetsuits on. So we jumped into the springs and got a chance to swim more or less comfortably, at least. But I was so surprised when I sort of drifted over the holes in the springs. I don't know if there's a technical term for them, but the power of the water that was coming out from those tiny holes was absolutely, you couldn't stay there. It just blew you away. This tiny little thing. And I wish you all get a chance to see it. And Tobacco Spring, I think, is the other one that gets kind of opened up. At least Lars showed us that, which is real. It's all the little sunfish in it were very, very cute. But this was one of the just most wonderful experiences of my life. And I'll probably be too old to kayak to it the next time I come around, which maybe that'll be a shame, but I'll try to stay fit. Do take the opportunity and fight to keep the Rodman Dam down permanently.
There are 20 named springs along the Ocklawaha River Channel. That's on the Ocklawaha, not in Silver, and all the way down to Marion Blue. And those are just the noticeable ones you can see during the drawdowns. In a restored river, we would see lots of seeps and gushing along the river channel. Just like you do if you ever snorkeled down the Rainbow River, you just see this constant upflow through the bottom of the river channel.
I have a question. I posted it on the chat, but once we've written our state legislators, as have I, with our opinions, what's the next, as regular people, what's the next step we can do?
Yeah, so I think at this stage, since we're halfway through the legislative session and there's really no traction on a bill for this, the best step would be, it was kind of the plan B for the people who have been working on this issue, and that's an executive order from Governor DeSantis. So what I would encourage you to do is write a letter to Governor DeSantis asking him to sign an executive order. If you go to the link, freetheocklawaha.com, there is a link there that will show you how you can get involved and get engaged. And it actually has talking points and a draft letter that you can borrow from. But if you can personalize it, that would be great. And believe it or not, I would actually encourage you probably not to email it and instead do either a written tangible note or a phone call. The emails are just kind of getting lost in the shuffle this legislative session. They've been pretty unresponsive. So that would be my advice in terms of next steps. And thank you for that good question, Nina.
Okay, so hopefully it makes a difference. I get really discouraged when after writing and nothing.
I know.
We have reason to be encouraged by some recent developments. We know that there is a new board member on the board of the St. Johns River Water Management District who's supportive of this idea, and we're hoping that he might be influential.
Okay.
Dave Spalding, you had your hand up, is that?
I'll pass. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Rick Chapman, I put in the chat, how large is how big is the impoundment? And Jane did answer it. The impoundment is 13,000 acres. Just to answer that question, if anybody else had it. I want one more.
So,
Bill.
quick question, John.
Pardon me?
Jane is suggesting that snail mail letters are the best way to write.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. That's definitely true. I mean, that's pretty much the best is to get an in-person meeting, with the legislature or even one of their assistants. But
yeah, good luck.
Actually, we did with the Sierra Club with Travis Hudson. We had a Zoom meeting with him. I don't know how much good it did, but we did have a meeting. But Bill Goldsberry, I'm going to point you out. Has anything like this, have you run into this, your experience with the Chesapeake Foundation? Anything up north, more in your region, anything comparable to the discussion this evening?
Well, I was going to make reference to the bigger picture nationwide, and Jim actually did that. And that is that with the many thousands of dams that we have, some of which are very old, hundreds of years old, there's been a growing movement in recent decades that recognizes the downsides of keeping those structures in place and the potential huge benefits of moving them and restoring the free-flowing rivers and fish migratory habitat and so forth. And in my experience up in Chesapeake, that has led to the removal of some pretty high-profile dams. In that case, the biggest issue was restoration of migratory shad and herring runs, which once were major fisheries in the Chesapeake and really are forgotten now. And so to me, it seems like, I don't know what the corollary is here, but this dam seems to be have all its own benefits way outweighing the downsides, such as they are, and should fall right into that national movement to remove dams and restore natural river flows. But having said that, I mean, I've worked with fishermen's groups on conservation issues for a long time, and I know how intractable that can be with respect to getting over their established practices, even though the rational arguments are very clear that they would benefit in the longer run. But it sounded to me like Jim and Jane are just on top of all the relevant arguments, and it's a matter of people like us just filling in to provide the voices to support their efforts and those arguments. And I mean, it sounds like this has been going on for decades, so maybe this is rose-colored glasses, but it just seems to me that it's inevitable that this effort would succeed and the dam would be removed.
Yeah, yeah.
I like the way you think, Bill.
And just winding the lens a little bit as I listen to all this, as those of us, and it's probably a good portion of us who grew up and educated during the 50s and 60s, dams were, you grew up, the Hoover Dam, that was sort of like the great American accomplishment. It benefited so many people, so on and so forth. There were pictures of it in the history books and everything, and you grew up with that idea. Was that sort of a misdirection and maybe led to the creation, like the Rodman Dam was started during, it was a New Deal operation at the beginning, right, Jim? That was the.
Yeah, I mean, the 20th century, basically from, the around 1930s, all the way up to about 1970. So like 1930 to 1970 is generally characterized by most historians as the era of big dam building. Now, we had dam building in the 1600s and 1700s, in colonial Atlantic seaboard all along the fall line, where they put mills up, hundreds and thousands of those, some of them still up. But the big dams, that were built really, but we came to the end of that era around just about around 1970 or so, and not just because we realized that the costs weren't always as, the benefits weren't always as great as we thought they were, but because we'd actually built out most of the locations that were, good for building dams. So we built a lot of them, and so there really aren't a lot of more places to build dams, particularly in the Western United States. But in the East, it's slightly different. But in every case, every dam that's ever been built has always been the same story. What are the costs and what are the benefits? And don't build it if the benefits don't outweigh the costs. And and in many cases, we have done that. We did that with the Ocklawaha River. The benefits didn't rise to the costs.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, I have a sort of a principle that no meeting should last more than 90 minutes. We're at that point now.
I have a quick question I put in the chat. If Jim or Jane could respond, I think it would be helpful.
Okay, let me just read it. Jim, they say that the dam is in need of some $6 million in repairs. What will happen if the maintenance and repairs are not undertaken? Can we be sure that the new infrastructure monies proposed by the Biden administration does not include money for the Rodman Dam? Should we be calling our Washington, D.C. representatives to make sure it's not included?
Well, you want me to take that, Jane? I'll be happy to. This is not a federal dam anymore. All this was deeded over to the state of Florida. It's our dam, and if it requires maintenance and repairs and all that sort of stuff, it comes out of our taxes. That's how it's going to happen. Now, if it comes to restoring the Ocklawaha River, we suspect we will have some partners with the federal government, particularly now more so than recently. But this is coming out of our pockets to have to do these repairs, and all dams have a lifetime, and before it's time to decommission them. This particular dam is starting to look a little frail and old, and gray around the temples, and it could potentially have some fairly significant potential for a catastrophic collapse. There was a report done just recently, looked at that, and because of the materials the dam's built out of, which is basically beach sand, that's what it basically be made out of, is beach sand. You know how stable beach sand is if you try to make sand castles out of it. The only thing that keeps it in place is the rocks and concrete on the top of it. But if it was to succumb to what's called a piping failure, which is the kind of failure that is typical for this kind of dam, earth-filled dam, it could drain the whole reservoir out in a matter of hours. It could put life in jeopardy, and it would put a lot of property in jeopardy as well.
Diana Bell?
Yeah, my comment relative to getting the federal government or, Biden's initiative on this dam in place is that I think bringing it to the federal attention may not be a good thing, but if somebody does that, I would think they would be looking for federal dollars. And if federal dollars were then put into that dam, then it would require a whole new NEPA compliance. And that, you don't think it would?
No, that's already been looked at.
No, that's already been done extensively. There have been multiple environmental impact studies done on this. The very unusual situation that we find ourselves in with this litigation against the U.S. Forest Service, we are actually aligned. We are on the same page. We want the same thing. It's just trying to get the state on board. So we're actually pretty hopeful this administration is going to help. But as Biden set forth in his presidential press conference the other day, he's all about prioritization, and the time is not right for this administration to take up this issue at this time. But we have been working the long game with the last several administrations on this, and we actually are on the same side. It's just getting the momentum to make it happen.
And
with that, John, I'm gonna probably beg off because I'm starving.
Okay, probably a lot of us are too. So listen.
Well, thank you for the answer though, Jane, because when I think about federal money, I immediately jump over to NEPA compliance. That's where my mind goes. So thank you for that answer.
No
Okay,
problem.
I feel maybe we should even have a part 2 sometime on this, seriously,
Sure.
where we can discuss this further. Look into Jane's suggestion for the website that has more information about it. Also, my email, contact me if you have any suggestions, comments about this, or suggestions for future events like this. I think it's good. I think that those of us in the environmental community have to communicate more often and share things, given what we're up against. So with that, goodbye. Thank you. Thank you, Nana, for suggesting this.
Thank you.
That was really the germ of this. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jane, and everybody else who contributed, which I think was everybody.
Thank you so much. I learned so much. Every day's a school day.
Thank you.
Happy Easter, everyone.
Have a good
Yeah.
weekend. Bye-bye.
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 Adios.